Our second lesson is from the Gospel of Luke, the 12th chapter, the words of Jesus. Listen now to God's word. Jesus said, "I came to bring fire to the earth, and how I wish it were already kindled. I have a baptism with which to be baptized, and what stress I am under until it is completed. Do you think that I have come to bring peace to the earth? No, I tell you, but rather division. From now on, 5 in one household will be divided, 3 against 2 and 2 against 3. They will be divided, father against son and son against father, mother against daughter and daughter against mother, mother-in-law against her daughter-in-law, and daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law." And Jesus also said to the crowds, "When you see a cloud rising in the west, you immediately say, 'It is going to rain,' and so it happens. And when you see the south wind blowing, you say, 'There will be scorching heat,' and it happens. You hypocrites! You know how to interpret the appearance of earth and sky, but you do not know how to interpret the present time." This is the word of the Lord. There are some things that I wish Jesus had not said. And this is one of them. Do you think that I have come to bring peace to the earth? No, I tell you, but rather division. And then he goes on to say that households and families will be divided against one another. He calls us hypocrites who cannot read the sign of the times. When I hear these words of Jesus, I think, wait a minute. What happened to the Prince of Peace? Crown him with many crowns, the Lord of Peace. Or in the words of the Charles Wesley hymn, what happened to gentle Jesus, meek and mild? This is no gentle lamb, but a roaring lion. And he says these words, and because he says them, we seek to understand them. Perhaps the best place to begin is with the understanding that the coming of Jesus into the world brings a crisis, a time of decision for or against him. For some, it will be a time of turning away from sin and turning to Jesus. For others, it will be letting go of familiar ways of doing things and embracing what is new and unknown. We know that from the coming of Jesus to the world, his coming causes some to reject the traditions of their Roman families or their Jewish culture and to become a part of a new family of faith, tied to no one culture, no one history, no one tradition. Jesus coming to the earth brings division, a time of crisis, division in both Jewish and Roman worlds. And then he criticizes the crowds for not being able to discern the sign of the time. You know, some listen to the teachings of Jesus, the Gospels tell us, but their hearts remain unmoved. Some, like the religious leaders of the people, are so enraged by the way his words and deeds upset the status quo that they want to kill him. The political operatives lurking behind the scenes, they see him as a threat to the uneasy peace of the land of Judea and the city of Jerusalem, a peace maintained by being subservient to the Roman overlords. And others begin to follow him gladly, but as Jesus himself says in the parable of the sower, the cares of the world, the lure of wealth, and the desire for other things choke out the word. They cannot read the sign of the times. But we know that Jesus can read the sign of the times. He can see the hypocrisy of the powerful. He knows the conflicts that surround him. He hears the lies whispered about him, the scheming that follows him, the suffering and death that lie before him. Jesus says, I came to bring fire to the earth. And how I wish it were already kindled. I have a baptism with which to be baptized, and what stress I am under until it is completed. Of course, we know that is the baptism of suffering and death on a cross. And it is knowing what lies before him, the slow but inevitable progress of time, only increases the anguish in the heart of Jesus. Can we read the sign of the times? If we can, then we would not be surprised that these images of fire and division in a world in which human beings are capable of living as if they are the center of the earth, the center of the universe, we would not be surprised. We would not be surprised when we know that people can destroy one another to get what they want, no matter what. We live in a world in which we crucify what is best and most noble in human life. I can never forget the words of the Sylvia Plath poem called Mary's Song, in which the poet says, "O golden child, the world will kill and eat." Can we read the sign of the times? You know, we may talk about peace in the world, but often it is a false face of peace maintained by force, coercion, and silence. And by silence, I mean, refusing to see, to talk about, to understand the terrible divisions of our culture, our society, our world. To pretend like everything is just fine. There are no real problems around us. By silence, I mean silencing of the voices of those who disagree with us, oppose us, or get in our way when we're on the way to get what we want. And there have been times when the Church of Christ itself has traded the peace of God for the false peace of this world. We talk about peace, but we do not give voice to the real injustices, social ills, and violence that lie beneath the seemingly calm surface of things. This is why Jesus says he comes to bring fire and division to the earth, to see the truth of things. And there are times when the church, as the prophet Jeremiah says, cries out, "Peace, peace," but there is no peace in the false peace of the world. I remember the Sunday when a member of this congregation stood there in the lectern giving a discipleship moment on domestic violence. You may remember it as well. She stood in front of all of us here in the sanctuary and told how she had grown up in a privileged environment, had everything you could want, had attended the best schools. And she said, looking at her, you would not imagine that she was the victim of physical abuse by her former husband. She had the courage to stand up before us all and to break that illusionary surface of things, to bring fire and division and get down to the truth of things, to shatter the illusion of peace. And then she told the even more terrible truth that when she finally confided in the pastor of her former church about the terrible abuse she was suffering, he basically said to her, implied to her, well, somehow it must be your fault. It was a call to the church to tell the truth, to shatter the illusion of peace, that we might know the deeper peace of God, to tell the truth about domestic violence and support those who are suffering. It was a call to turn away from the illusion of peace and embrace the peace of Christ that calls us to accountability, compassion, justice, and change. Beginning next Sunday, Dr. John Franke will begin his 8 o'clock theology thoughts and coffee class with a study of Dr. James Cone's book, The Cross and the Lynching Tree. The title itself probably suggests to some of us we don't want to hear about it. but we need to shatter the illusion of peace. In his book, Dr. Cone declares that the great failure of white American theologians and churches is their failure for more than 100 years to understand the connection between the suffering of Jesus and the terrifying lynching of black men, women, and children in America. We say in our faith that the cross is the center of the faith, and through the cross we have peace with God and peace with one another. And yet, Dr. James Cone writes, what is invisible to white Christians and their theologians is inescapable to black people. The cross is the reminder that the world is fraught with many contradictions, many lynching trees. And when black people sing about Jesus' cross, they often think about black lives lost to the lynching tree. Through their experience of suffering, African Americans have often found themselves existentially at the foot of the cross of Jesus, experiencing his fate, believing that only Jesus understands their lot because he has suffered as they have. A word that's hard to hear because it shatters the illusion of peace. For in the suffering and death of Jesus, he identified with the outcast, the oppressed, and the brutalized. And when you do that, there is going to be fire and conflict on this earth before there is true peace. We sang in the beautiful words of our second hymn, words that have always touched my heart. Words that tell that the peace of God is not like worldly peace. Did you think about the words as you sang them? They cast their nets in Galilee just off the hills of brown. Such happy, simple fisher folk before the Lord came down. Contented, peaceful fishermen before they ever knew the peace of God that filled their hearts brimful and broke them too. Young John, who trimmed the flapping sail, homeless in Patmos, died. Peter, who hauled the teeming nets, head down, was crucified. The peace of God, it is no peace, but strife, closed in the sod. Yet disciples pray but for one thing, the marvelous peace of God. When we understand this truth, it leads us away from empty religious talk about peace to a hunger for the deep peace of God. And this is why Paul, in his writings to the Ephesians, can say what sounds like the exact opposite of these words of Jesus. He can write, Jesus is our peace. For in his flesh he has made both groups into one and broken down the dividing wall of hostility between us. For Jesus is the one who has broken down the dividing wall of hostility that destroys our families and communities, that leads us to denigrate others, that prevents us from even desiring to know the truth, that pits one people against another. You know, there are some things that I am glad Jesus said, and this is one of them. For in these hard words, Jesus meets the brutality and the evil and injustice of our world with the judgment, justice, and mercy of God. In these words, Jesus takes the blinders off our eyes. He helps us see that evil must first be unmasked in order to be overcome and transformed. And you know, he teaches us throughout the Gospels that it begins first with that evil that lies way down there, hidden deep within our own hearts. Oh yes, there are two faces of peace. The cheap illusion of peace that the world loves to parade around like the emperor with no clothes. And the costly peace of Jesus, won for you, me, all people, the earth, in the cross. For the suffering of Jesus at the hands of a sinful and self-deluded world is the price that is paid to show the world that it is indeed possible to forgive those who hurt you, to extend the circle of your love and concern to the folks who aren't like you, to forgive your enemies, and to have your mind changed. And it is the resurrection of Jesus that is the evidence, or the proof, if you will, that everything that Jesus said and did and lived for is true. The resurrection of Jesus is God's yes to Jesus. And this is why Jesus can say to the disciples, even as his heart is in anguish, even as he goes to face his crucifixion, peace I leave with you. My peace I give unto you. But not as the world gives do I give to you. Let not your hearts be troubled, neither let them be afraid. Yes, there are some things that I am glad Jesus said. For these hard words set us free from the illusion of peace, so that we may embrace the true peace of God. Amen.